Have you ever sat alone staring at the ceiling, wondering how someone who once claimed to care could vanish without a word, like you were never even real to them? You're not alone. And no, it's not your fault. But what you do next determines everything. They discarded you thinking you'd break, that you'd chase, that you'd explain, that you'd beg for closure, but they never expected what you're about to become. This isn't just about pain, it's about power. It's about walking away in such a way that makes them question everything. Comment, "I'm untouchable," if you're done explaining yourself and ready to be unrecognizable. Number 1, you were never special to them. They never saw you as irreplaceable, not even for a second. And that's the truth most men choke on while staring at their phones, wondering where they went wrong. But the truth is, she didn't leave because you lacked something. She left because the moment you stopped serving her needs like a product off a shelf, she no longer saw the benefit of keeping you around. And while you were replaying memories that meant the world to you, she was already entertaining someone else who made her feel something new. Not necessarily better, just new. Because her need for emotional stimulation always outweighed her need for loyalty, and you weren't the first man to experience this sharp turn from passion to coldness. Nor will you be the last, because too many men mistake temporary affection for permanent investment, not realizing that the love she gave you was a performance designed to elicit more from you, more attention, more reassurance, more sacrifice, and once the supply ran low, or you started asking for respect instead of just giving, she withdrew like it was your fault for needing the same effort you gave. And in this culture where validation is currency and social media offers an endless carousel of attention, women are trained to believe that the next man is always one message away, one reaction away. And so when you gave your all, you weren't being loved. You were being used. And the moment your usefulness expired, so did her loyalty. Because when she left without a second thought, that was never a mistake. It was a decision made long before she stopped texting you back. It began the moment she started imagining her life without you while still smiling in your face. And while you were planning for a future together, she was making plans without you in it. And yet men don't realize this until it's too late, because they're taught to endure, to fix, to fight for what they love. But what they should have been taught is that when someone sees your value as transactional, they will abandon you. The second your sacrifice no longer benefits them, and it hurts because everything you thought was real was just convenience disguised as connection, and she didn't need closure because in her mind, the relationship was already over emotionally, even if it wasn't over physically. And when she finally vanished or blamed you for why she had to leave, she wasn't looking back, not because you weren't worth it, but because she never saw you as worthy in the way you saw her. And if you think this is rare, think again, because so many men give loyalty expecting reciprocity and get punished the moment they assert standards. And it's not because they're weak, it's because they never realized the truth that's buried beneath fake smiles and half-hearted affection. You were never hers. You were her emotional safety net, her therapist, her backup plan, her dopamine hit. And when your emotional availability no longer sparked her excitement or reinforced her control, she detached not in confusion, but in calculation, because she believed she could do better. And because society reinforced that idea, she acted on it without guilt. And now here you are, questioning yourself, doubting your worth, rewinding every conversation to find the moment it all went wrong. But the moment wasn't a moment at all. It was the entire framework built on imbalance and fantasy. And the sooner you accept this, the sooner you rise, not by trying to win her back, but by realizing she was never truly invested to begin with. And that kind of awakening is brutal, but necessary, because once you stop romanticizing the version of her you created in your head, you'll see the reality of what you were dealing with. A person who never saw you as someone to cherish, only someone to consume. Number 2, they expected you to chase. She didn't walk away hoping you'd understand. She walked away assuming you'd panic, thinking the withdrawal of her presence would shatter your sense of identity so deeply that you'd lose your sense of direction just to win her back. Because to her, walking away wasn't the end. It was the beginning of a game where your reactions would validate her impact. And this belief isn't unique to her. It's embedded into the behavior of many who've learned that male desperation is the most predictable reaction to female disinterest. And so the moment she left, she was already watching for the signs that you'd come running. The late-night texts, the mutual friend inquiries, the Instagram story views, because the narrative she built in her mind needed one thing to be true, that you still needed her to feel whole. And if you broke that narrative, if you didn't chase, if you didn't beg for clarity or closure, it would disrupt the image of control she constructed. And this is why most men unknowingly reinforce that narrative by making themselves emotionally available even after being discarded, thinking that by being kind or patient or understanding, they're showing strength, when in reality they're being measured, not admired. And your first instinct after a breakup isn't based on logic, it's based on emotional addiction, the need to fix what's been broken. But what if it was never broken? What if it was designed to expire once your usefulness was replaced by her boredom? And when you refuse to chase, you're not punishing her. You're breaking a pattern she's come to rely on, a pattern where she leaves and you explain. She ignores and you plead, she blocks and you apologize. But what happens when none of those reactions come? What happens when instead of spiraling, you shift gears and go silent? Not for effect, but because you've finally realized you were the only one who ever cared. What happens is, she doesn't just notice your absence, she obsesses over it, because the absence of reaction is more terrifying than anger. It implies detachment, not delay, and detachment means you're no longer under her influence. And that's the one outcome she never prepared for, because if you don't react, she has no confirmation of power, and power without acknowledgement is irrelevant. And now she's left with questions, not confidence. Because when a man walks away without needing to be seen, without trying to be understood, he becomes unreadable, and unreadable means unshakable, and unshakable is unforgettable. Because even if she doesn't come back, she remembers the one man who didn't crumble under her silence, and that memory lingers in ways affection never could. Because every man before you followed the script: heartbreak, reaction, apology, re-entry. But you broke the sequence, and in doing so, you reclaimed your peace. And that's the difference between the man she forgets and the one she never fully understands. And here's where the transformation happens. When you no longer seek to be validated by someone who discarded you, you begin to validate yourself, not through revenge, but through redirection. And as your energy shifts, everything about you changes: your posture, your purpose, your patience, and suddenly you're no longer watching her stories, you're writing your own. And this new chapter doesn't include her as a protagonist, just a footnote in the story of a man who realized his worth was never dependent on someone else's recognition of it. This shift you've just made, the one where you stop chasing, where you take back every ounce of your power, doesn't have to be temporary. That strength, that clarity, that peace can be yours every single day, because the Stoic Relationship Blueprint is not just a book. It's a lifelong guide designed for men who are done repeating the same cycles. Inside, you'll find the mindset, tools, and strategies that help you rebuild in a way that no one can take from you again. It's in the description below, and once you own it, it's yours forever. No expiration, no subscriptions, just the truth in your hands whenever you need it. Number 3. They tried to humble you by leaving. They didn't leave quietly hoping you'd move on peacefully. They left deliberately to make a statement, to watch you fall from the pedestal they once begged to be on, and they wanted that fall to hurt, because they wanted to feel taller in comparison to the man they just reduced to too emotional or too intense or too needy. But deep down, it wasn't your neediness that pushed them away. It was your consistency, your stability, your reliability. All the things that remind them they were never ready for a man who actually cared, because that kind of love brings accountability, and they weren't looking for growth. They were looking for control. And when you finally started asking questions, demanding clarity, expecting them to match your effort, that's when they realized the fantasy was over. And instead of leaning in, they bailed, not out of confusion, but out of fear that you might uncover just how shallow their emotional depth really is. So they walked away, blocked you, blamed you, rewrote the narrative to make it sound like you were the problem, and then flaunted someone new like it was nothing, because in their mind, they didn't leave a man. They reset the game, hoping you'd spiral so they could feel superior to the mess they created. And this is what too many men don't understand. When she leaves you, she often does it to feel powerful, not to find peace. And the minute she's gone, she's already crafting the story she'll tell everyone about how you were too much, about how she gave and gave until she couldn't anymore, all while ignoring the fact that she only gave when it was easy. And the second it required maturity, patience, or emotional depth, she chose distance over dialogue. But they don't admit that part, because that would expose the truth. They never intended to build, they intended to benefit, and once that benefit expired, so did their loyalty. And this is where most men collapse. Not because of the loss, but because of the illusion being shattered, because you weren't just mourning her, you were mourning the future you thought was possible. And that's where the real pain lives, not in the goodbye, but in the betrayal of everything that came before it. And yet, as hard as it is, that betrayal is your awakening, because if you really look back, you'll see it. The way she started withdrawing emotionally while pretending to still care, the way her tone shifted from warmth to indifference, the way you felt like you were competing for attention that used to come naturally. And all of it was her way of testing how far she could pull away before you broke. And when you didn't break, when you stood your ground, that's when she left, because you were no longer easy to manipulate. And that's the part that stings her later, not the relationship ending, but the fact that you didn't collapse the way she predicted. And that's when her regret begins to creep in, not because she wants you back, but because she lost control of the narrative, and she's left with the realization that the man she discarded is now the man she can't reach. And if you truly want to rise from this, you need to stop asking why she left and start asking why you stayed so long in a space where you constantly had to earn love that should have been given freely. And once you get that answer, you no longer chase closure. You create distance, not to punish her, but to preserve yourself. And that kind of transformation isn't loud, it's silent, but it's permanent, because once a man sees the truth, he can't unsee it. And once you embrace the discomfort of growth, you become the very thing she wasn't prepared for. A man who no longer needs validation to know his worth. A man who builds not out of revenge, but out of clarity. And clarity is a weapon far sharper than pain, because pain fades, but clarity stays, and it guides every future decision you make. And if you follow it, if you trust it, you'll never find yourself begging for the love of someone who sees you as disposable again. Number 4. They're used to men falling apart. She didn't expect strength, she expected chaos, because in her experience, most men unravel the moment affection is withdrawn, and that's the behavioral pattern she was trained to anticipate. Emotional outbursts, desperate messages, late-night apologies, because that chaos feeds her need to feel desired without requiring her to actually invest. And so when you didn't fall apart, when you didn't show signs of collapse, it didn't confuse her, it shook her identity, because everything she believed about her power over you relied on your emotional dependence. And when you didn't react, when your life didn't spiral, when you moved differently, not with rage but with purpose, that's when she started paying attention. Not because she missed you, but because you broke the script. And too many men fall into that script willingly, thinking vulnerability means surrendering control, when in fact, real strength is in choosing not to respond when everything in you wants to reach out. And if you've ever been in that place, that cold, quiet moment where you sit with the realization that she's gone and she's not coming back, not because she can't, but because she doesn't want to, that's when your transformation begins, because up until now, your self-worth was tied to her attention. But once you untangle that connection, you become dangerous, not in a destructive way, but in a way that terrifies those who once relied on your emotional availability to feel important. Because now, she can't read you, can't gauge your intentions, can't find the usual cues that told her you still cared, and that ambiguity is where she starts to lose grip. And while she tells herself she's unbothered, she's checking your stories, asking mutual friends about you, scanning your posts for hidden meanings. Because even if she moved on physically, she needs to know she still exists in your mind, and when she doesn't, that's when it hits. This wasn't a temporary reaction, this was a fundamental shift, and that's what too many women underestimate. A man who stops trying isn't sulking, he's evolving, and once he reaches that level, there's no going back, because he's tasted the peace that comes from not explaining himself, not defending his intentions, not begging to be understood. And now, every move he makes is intentional, every conversation is filtered, every relationship is weighed, because he's no longer driven by the need to be chosen. He's driven by the clarity of who he is and what he'll never tolerate again. And if you want to become that man, it starts with a decision. Not to hate her, not to retaliate, but to grow in such a way that her exit becomes the greatest thing that ever happened to you. And once you decide that, once you commit to that path, everything changes. Your focus sharpens, your purpose expands, and your energy becomes so centered that the same woman who once thought she broke you now watches from a distance, confused, intrigued, and ultimately forgotten, because she didn't expect you to thrive. And now that you are, she's learning the hardest truth of all. Men like you don't fall apart. They rise in silence and return with vision. Number 5. Your growth becomes their worst nightmare. The moment you stop seeking validation, the world around you starts to shift, and nothing makes a person who once underestimated you more uncomfortable than witnessing your evolution in real time, especially when they believed you'd stay broken, because they didn't just expect you to fall. They needed you to, not because they wanted to see you in pain, but because your pain would have validated the decision they made to leave. It would have made it easier to justify ghosting you, easier to blame you for their betrayal, easier to romanticize their version of the truth, where they were the victim escaping a suffocating situation. But when you refuse to break down and instead start building a version of yourself that doesn't resemble the man they walked away from, that's when the discomfort sets in, not because they care, but because your existence becomes proof that their assumptions were wrong. And this is the reality no one talks about. Women don't regret leaving a man who falls apart. They regret leaving a man who becomes unrecognizable in his purpose, his confidence, his path, and your growth forces them to look in the mirror, not in admiration but in confusion, because the narrative they told themselves no longer fits, and so they start asking questions they'll never ask you directly. How did he change so fast? Who is helping him? Why doesn't he reach out? And those questions aren't about reconciliation. They're about control slipping through their fingers, because women are taught early that their departure is supposed to hurt you, that you're supposed to stay stuck, questioning, waiting, and hoping. But when you don't, when you get up and go quiet, not in bitterness but in clarity, that's when their ego starts to crack. And this isn't about revenge, it's about value, because your silence, your focus, your energy, it all becomes a new currency, one they no longer have access to. And as you rise, everything about you changes. Your presence sharpens, your goals solidify, your language becomes precise, and suddenly she finds herself checking in, not always directly, but through likes, through stories, through subtle messages meant to test the waters, because your progress now serves as a mirror to her stagnation, and she needs to know you're still reachable. But the greatest shift happens not when you ignore her, but when you respond with nothing to prove, because that's when she realizes she lost a version of you that's never coming back. And that version wasn't perfect, but he was available, he was generous, he was open. And now you've become the kind of man who gives those things only to people who earn them. And that's terrifying to someone who once believed they could access your soul without effort. And this is why your growth becomes her nightmare. Not because she wants you back, but because she never imagined losing access to you would mean losing a reflection of herself she could manage. And now you're the one thing she doesn't understand anymore. And in a world where control is everything, that confusion is unbearable. And while she might try to replicate what she had with you in someone else, she'll keep circling the same emotional cul-de-sac, because what she misses isn't just you. It's the influence she once had over your heart, your time, your mind, and now she's just another person in the crowd watching you rise, unable to interrupt, unable to connect, unable to undo the growth she never saw coming. And this is why you keep building, because the longer you stay silent, the louder your progress becomes, and no amount of old memories can compete with the man you've become, a man she no longer has the language to reach. Because you didn't just move on, you ascended, and that kind of growth doesn't just heal you, it haunts her. Number 6. Your discipline is the death of their control. There's something terrifying about a man who no longer reacts, not because he doesn't care, but because he's mastered himself. And this is where most women begin to falter. Not when you argue, not when you cry, not when you try to fix things, but when you stop offering access to your inner world, when every call goes unanswered, not out of anger, but out of intention, when every temptation to reach back is met with clarity and not confusion. Because discipline isn't about ignoring her to get a reaction, it's about honoring yourself so fully that reacting would feel like betrayal. And this is the kind of man she wasn't prepared to lose. The man who stayed calm while everything around him screamed for attention. The man who didn't chase but restructured his life like she never existed in it to begin with. And what she never realized is that this kind of composure isn't passive. It's earned. It's developed through late nights where you battle your urges in silence, where you feel the ache of missing her, but choose your future over your feelings. And every time you make that choice, you cut the cord that tethered you to her emotionally. And over time, she feels that shift, not because you post motivational quotes or show off on social media, but because she senses it in the small ways, the lack of response, the absence of emotional spikes, the fact that her bait no longer pulls you back into the chaos. And this is where control dies, not because she stopped trying, but because you stopped biting. And this is what no one teaches men. Your greatest strength isn't in how you pursue, it's in what you refuse to entertain. And when she finally realizes that the version of you who was once accessible, emotional, reactive is gone, she doesn't just question your loyalty, she questions her identity, because her power was never in who she was. It was in how much of you she could control. And now that control has evaporated into discipline, she's forced to face the truth. She doesn't have the leverage she thought, and you're no longer the man she remembers. And while that might not bother her at first, over time, it unsettles her, because consistency breeds curiosity. And when she can't predict your moves, she can't feel important. And this is the death of control, not in drama, but in order, in restraint, in daily actions that signal to the world and to her that your life has direction. And now she's just a chapter that doesn't affect the plot. And the more you commit to that path, the more your presence changes, not in volume, but in weight. Because now every interaction you allow is deliberate, every conversation has a filter, every invitation gets measured, and suddenly you're no longer accessible to people who used to drain you. And that shift is permanent, because discipline builds a man who isn't just hard to manipulate, he's impossible to predict. And unpredictability in a man who's focused is the one thing that no emotional manipulator knows how to handle, and so they retreat, not because they want to, but because they no longer have the map to your emotions. And if you've ever wondered what true growth looks like, it's that moment when you no longer check your phone, no longer wonder what she's doing, because your life is so full of purpose that her memory becomes background noise to your mission. And this is where everything changes, not just your relationships, but your identity, your work, your health, your peace, and that version of you who once chased, who once begged, who once believed that your value was tied to her validation. He's gone. And what replaced him is a man built on principles, on clarity, on structure, and no amount of attention or affection can compromise that foundation again, because now your boundaries aren't negotiable, they're sacred, and anyone who tries to test them gets met with the most terrifying answer of all: indifference. Number 7, you never come back the same. There comes a point in every man's life where the pain becomes so raw, so clarifying, so unavoidable, that returning to who he used to be becomes impossible. And that point often doesn't come in the form of loud heartbreaks or explosive betrayals, but in the quiet recognition that the person you gave your best to never once truly understood what they were holding. And when you arrive at that place, not out of anger, but out of absolute clarity, you become untouchable, not because you've built walls, but because you've finally raised your standards to a level where the access people once had to you can no longer be bought with charm, nostalgia, or temporary emotion. And the woman who once thought she had you figured out now stares at a version of you that she can't read, can't reach, can't rattle, because this version of you doesn't need to be heard or validated. He is self-anchored, he is self-owned. And the transformation is not about becoming cold, it's about becoming clear. Because once you experience being discarded like a receipt, spoken to like you were the inconvenience, blamed for reactions to betrayal, you begin to understand that returning to the man who once tolerated that treatment isn't just self-betrayal, it's a slow suicide of your identity. And this is the awakening that changes everything, because now you understand what she never did. Real loyalty cannot coexist with disrespect, and love cannot live where accountability is absent. And while she may have walked away thinking you'd pause your growth waiting for her return, what she didn't realize is that her exit became your ignition. Her absence became the space you needed to hear your own voice again, and that voice didn't whisper comfort. It screamed direction, and you followed it into your pain, through your confusion, and out the other side as a man reborn, not through revenge, but through relentless self-respect. And now every move you make is aligned with a version of you that doesn't seek to be chosen, because you've already chosen yourself, and that scares her, not because she wants to come back, but because she knows she couldn't reach you now even if she tried. And that's the irony. The very man she didn't fight for is the man she can no longer access, not because he blocked her, but because he became unrecognizable to her emotional patterns. And if you've made it this far, you know exactly what that feels like. That deep, inner change that happens when you stop hoping they'll understand and start becoming the kind of man that doesn't need them to. And the moment you commit to that path, everything shifts. The way you walk, the way you speak, the way you interact with the world. Your presence becomes heavier, not in burden, but in depth. And people feel it without understanding it, because they sense that you've been somewhere they haven't, that you've faced things they run from, that you've lost and risen in a way that can't be taught, only earned. And now the rules are different, not because you're playing games, but because you've rewritten your own code, And this code doesn't allow access to people who leave when it's inconvenient, who love you conditionally, who only show up when they benefit, because you've finally learned that peace isn't something someone else can give you. It's something you cultivate by removing everything and everyone who disrupts it. And while she may try to come back with the same words, the same smile, the same apologies dressed in new language, it won't matter, because you've seen behind the curtain, and once you've seen the truth, you can't go back to pretending, and that's what becoming this version of you means. It means accepting the loss without chasing it, understanding the past without reliving it, and building your life not around who left, but around who you're becoming. And the man you're becoming is one who doesn't fold under emotional manipulation, who doesn't question his worth based on someone's inability to love him properly, who doesn't repeat cycles disguised as second chances because he knows better now. He's felt the cost of betraying himself for someone who wouldn't lift a finger to hold him in his lowest, and that cost was too high to ever pay again. And now you protect your energy like it's sacred, because it is, and you move through life not in defense, but in discernment, choosing who gets to stand beside you, not based on history or potential, but based on consistency and action. And the result is not just healing, it's evolution, the kind that makes people stop and wonder how you got here, and the answer will always be the same. I never came back. I rebuilt. And the man you see now isn't a return, he's a rebirth. And from this point forward, every version of you is untouchable to the past. That once tried to break you. If you've ever felt discarded, misunderstood, or emotionally played like a game piece in someone else's story, this is your line in the sand, because you don't go back to being the man who begged for love that should have been given freely. You become the man they can never reach again. Comment, "I own my peace now" below if you're done waiting, done explaining, done bleeding for people who only cared when it was convenient. Like this video and subscribe, not just for you, but for the next man still stuck in confusion, still believing it's his fault she left, still hoping she'll come back. This truth saves lives. It saves years. And if you're serious about rewriting your story with unshakable clarity, the Stoic Relationship Blueprint is in the description. It's not just a book, it's the ultimate transformation, the knowledge you'll carry for life. Get it now. Let them wonder how you became untouchable.